The retirement story is broken. Not because retirement is bad, not because rest is wrong, and not because everyone should keep working forever. That is not what I believe. The retirement story is broken because it was built for a different world, a different economy, a different life expectancy, a different kind of work, and a very different kind of future. And yet, many people over 50 are still trying to make one of the biggest decisions of their life using a script that no longer fits. The script says, work hard, build a career, provide, achieve, save, reach a certain age, step away, and call that freedom. But here's the problem. A lot of people reach that stage and realize something very uncomfortable. They're not done. They may be done with the old version of work. They may be done with the old pressure. They may be done with the old calendar. They may be done with proving themselves. But they are not done being useful. They're not done building. They're not done contributing. And for many people, let's be honest, they may not be financially ready to stop earning either. So now they're stuck between two bad options. Keep working in a life that no longer fits, or retire into a future that may not be emotionally or financially strong enough. And that is the tension nobody talks about clearly enough. Because the real question is not just, should I retire? The better question is, what do I build next? That is what this video is about. The path nobody talks about. Not retirement, not grinding, not pretending to be 35 again. The Rewire. And by the end of this video, I want to give you a language for that third path. Because retirement is not the enemy. Drift is. Let's start with the old script. One of the first modern retirement systems was introduced in Germany in 1889. Otto von Bismarck introduced an old-age pension system. The qualifying age was 70. 70, not 55, not 60, not even 65, 70. And the point was not that people would spend 30 or 40 years in leisure. That was never the design. It was a policy built for another world. A world where life expectancy was shorter. A world where work was often physical. A world where people were not expected to live for decades after their main career with experience, energy, relationships, and wisdom still available. But that is exactly where many people are today. You may have another 20 years, or 30, or maybe even 40, and not just years of survival, years of contribution, years of creativity, years of judgment, years of influence, years of possibility. So the question becomes obvious. Why are we still using an old retirement script to define a completely different stage of life? That is the problem. We inherited a script for a life most of us are no longer living. Now, before I go further, I want to be very clear. If you are ready to retire, and that feels honest, and that feels peaceful, and that feels right for you, beautiful. Really, this video is not an attack on retirement. It is not an attack on rest. It is not an attack on travel, golf, painting, sailing, reading, volunteering, or spending more time with your family. That can be a wonderful life. And if you can do that with joy, health, and a strong financial plan behind it, I genuinely celebrate that. That is not the problem. But it is also not everyone's reality. And we need to stop pretending it is. A lot of people hit 50, 55, or 60 and realize the math is not as simple as they hoped. They may live longer than expected. Their expenses may not go down as much as expected. Healthcare may become more expensive. Adult children may still need help. Aging parents may need support. Markets may not cooperate, and the money saved may not be enough to fund 3 or 4 decades without some kind of income. That is not pessimism, that is reality. And reality deserves respect. So for many people, the question is not, can I finally stop working? The better question is, what kind of income generating life can I build now that does not trap me in the old version of work? That is a very different question. And honestly, it is a much better one. Because the goal is not to work forever. The goal is to build the next chapter that gives you freedom, meaning, and financial oxygen. Not just one of the three. All three matter. Freedom matters, meaning matters, money matters. And any serious conversation about life after 50 has to include all of it, not just the dream, the reality too. And this is why the early retirement conversation matters. Because the old retirement script is not only coming from the past, it is still being sold right now, often by companies, and the language is very polished. Voluntary retirement, transition opportunity, separation incentive, early retirement package, next chapter. And let me be fair, an early retirement package is not automatically a bad thing. For some people, it can be a blessing. It can give them breathing room, it can give them options, it can give them a way out of a place they were ready to leave anyway. So I'm not here to say never take the package. That would be ridiculous. Sometimes taking it is the smartest move. But here is where I would be careful. Do not confuse a financial offer with a life plan, because they are not the same thing. A package may help you leave, but it does not tell you what you are walking into. It may solve the exit, but it does not solve the life. And that is where a lot of people get caught. They make the exit plan, but they do not make the next chapter plan. And then the celebration fades, the calendar opens, the title disappears, the rhythm changes, the phone rings less, the questions stop coming. And then one morning, they wake up and ask, now what? That is the question. Now what? Not just financially, emotionally, practically, socially, spiritually, strategically. Now what? And if you do not answer that question deliberately, the world will answer it for you. That is drift. And drift can look very elegant from the outside. It can look comfortable. It can look successful. It can look responsible. But underneath, something important starts to fade. Direction, energy, identity, momentum. The feeling that you are still building something that matters. That is why I say again, retirement is not the enemy. Drift is. So here's where we are going. There are three paths people usually take after 50. The first path is full retirement. The second path is to keep working exactly as before. And the third path is the one I believe we need to talk about much more seriously. The rewire. Not retirement, not reinvention, not grinding. A deliberate next chapter built from who you already are. And after we walk through those three paths, I will share the 4 questions I used to think about this. Mission, Unlearn, System, and Table. That is the M.U.S.T framework. But before we get there, we need to look honestly at the first 2 paths, because this is where many capable people get trapped. The first path is full retirement. The calendar empties, the meetings stop, the flights stop, the pressure drops. The constant responsibility starts to fade, and at first, that can feel wonderful. It can feel like relief. It can feel like freedom. It can feel like the first deep breath in years. And again, for some people, that is exactly what they wanted. They wanted time, they wanted quiet, they wanted family, they wanted travel, they wanted rest, they wanted space. And if that is you, that is valid. But for other people, something else begins to happen. Not right away, slowly. At first, the open calendar feels like freedom. Then the open calendar starts to feel a little too open. The rhythm disappears. The sense of direction gets softer. The phone rings less. The questions stop coming. The identity that was tied to being needed starts to loosen. And people do not always talk about this because it can feel ungrateful. You are supposed to be happy. You are supposed to say, I'm free now. You are supposed to enjoy it. But privately, some people begin to feel something they did not expect. Not freedom, emptiness. Not peace, restlessness. Not joy, a strange kind of invisibility. And for some people, there is another layer, the money layer. Because it is one thing to retire into a life that is fully funded. It is another thing to retire into uncertainty, to wonder if the money will last, to wonder if the market will cooperate, to wonder if healthcare will become a problem, to wonder if you will need to create income again, but you have no idea how. That is not freedom, that is pressure with a nicer name. And that is the part we need to say out loud. An empty calendar is not the same thing as a meaningful life. And a retirement account is not the same thing as a plan for the next 30 years. Both matter, but they are not the same. A spreadsheet can tell you if you can leave. It cannot tell you what you are leaving for. And that is where many people get stuck. They leave something, but they do not build the next thing. The second path is the opposite. Instead of retiring, the person keeps going. Same work, same habits, same identity, same calendar, same playbook, same way of proving themselves. And honestly, this makes sense. Because the old playbook worked. It created success. It created money. It created status. It created relationships. It created a reputation. It created a life. So, of course, people keep using it. Why wouldn't they? But then something starts to shift. The industry changes, the market changes, technology changes, the family changes, the body changes, the energy changes, and maybe, most importantly, the person changes. What used to feel exciting now feels repetitive. What used to feel meaningful now feels like maintenance. What used to feel like ambition now feels like obligation. And this can be hard to notice, because from the outside, everything still looks fine. You are busy, you are useful, you are earning, you are responsible. People still respect you, people still need you, the machine still works. But somewhere underneath all that activity, you know the truth. You're not fully alive in it anymore. You're showing up, but not with the same force. You're still working, but you're not really building. You are maintaining a life that may no longer fit. And here is the part most people misunderstand. You can be busy and still be drifting. You can be successful and still be drifting. You can be earning very good money and still be drifting. Drift is not laziness. Drift is not failure. Drift is not doing nothing. Drift is continuing without choosing. It is letting momentum make decisions that your soul has not approved. And the reason this is dangerous is simple. When you do not decide what you want next, life decides for you. And life does not always choose well. Then there is the third path, the rewire. This is the path nobody talks about enough. And it is the whole point of this video. The rewire is not retirement, and it is not reinvention. I do not love the word reinvention, because reinvention often sounds like you have to become someone else, as if the person you have been is no longer useful, as if your past is something to escape, as if you need to burn everything down and start from zero. I do not believe that, especially after 50. You're not a blank page. You have lived, you have built, you have survived things, you have made mistakes, you have learned what matters, you have judgment, you have relationships, you have pattern recognition, you have scars, you have instincts, you have a sense of what is worth your time and what is not. That is not baggage, that is raw material. The Rewire says, take everything that made you effective and use it differently. Not to repeat the old life, but to build the next one with more intention. Maybe that means starting a business. Maybe it means advising. Maybe it means consulting. Maybe it means teaching. Maybe it means writing. Maybe it means building a small expert practice. Maybe it means mentoring. Maybe it means helping a very specific group of people. Maybe it means creating an income stream from knowledge you already have. Maybe it means doing less but with more force. The form can change, but the point is the same. You're not done. You're done with the old structure. That is a very important distinction. Because many people do not need a smaller life. They need a better designed one. They do not need to stop contributing. They need to stop contributing in ways that train them. They do not need to kill their ambition. They need ambition that fits who they are now. They do not need to disappear. They need to rewire. So now I want to give you the philosophy behind this, not as motivation, not as a cute set of slogans, but as a practical way of seeing the next chapter. There are 4 beliefs behind the rewired approach. 4 beliefs that I think matter deeply after 50, and each one pushes against the old retirement script. First, experience is not history. It is raw material. That is a very important distinction. History is something you remember. Raw material is something you build with. And too many people reach a certain age and start treating their experience like history. Old titles, old companies, old wins, old stories, old chapters. Things they used to do, things they used to be. But that is not how I see it. Your experience is not a museum. It is a toolbox. It is infrastructure. It is the thing that lets you see patterns faster. It is the thing that helps you understand people better. It is the thing that helps you avoid mistakes you no longer need to make. It is the thing that helps you know when something is real and when it is noise. Now, does some of it need updating? Of course. Some skills need to change. Some beliefs need to be challenged. Some habits need to be replaced. But the core of your experience is not obsolete, it is underused. And that is a very different problem. Because if you treat your experience like history, you only talk about what you used to do. But if you treat it like raw material, you ask a better question. How can I use what I know now? That question changes everything. Second, ambition does not expire. It just needs a new shape. And this matters because ambition after 50 does not usually feel the same as ambition at 30. At 30, ambition often wants proof, more status, more money, more speed, more recognition, more wins, more people noticing. And there is nothing wrong with that. That is part of life. But later, ambition changes. It gets quieter, more selective, less interested in proving, more interested in meaning, less interested in being everywhere, more interested in being useful where it matters. That does not mean ambition has disappeared. It means ambition has matured. And mature ambition needs a different structure. It cannot run on the same fuel as young ambition. Not ego, not adrenaline, not panic, not the need to prove people wrong. At this stage, ambition needs clarity. It needs rhythm. It needs a mission. It needs the right people around it. It needs a way to generate income if income is still part of the equation. And for many people, it is. There is no shame in that. Needing or wanting to earn after 50 is not failure. It is just part of the design challenge. The goal is not to pretend money does not matter. The goal is to create a way of earning that does not put you back inside the old cage. That is mature ambition. Not hustle, not performance, not pretending to be young, but the honest belief that says, I still have something to build, and I want to build it differently now. Third, the danger is not failure. The danger is drift. And I really believe this. Most people at this stage are not truly afraid of failure. They have failed before. They have survived things. They have lost money, lost deals, lost people, made mistakes, started over. They know life does not always go according to plan. So failure is not the deepest fear. The deeper fear is quieter. It sounds like this: what if 5 years go by and nothing new gets built? What if I had more in me but never used it? What if I slowly adapted to a small life without realizing it? What if I became comfortable but not alive? And for many people, there is also this question: what if I need income later and I did not build anything that can create it? That is not fear mongering, that is practical. Drift is not only emotional, drift can also be financial, strategic, relational, physical, spiritual. It can become the slow loss of options. And the difficult thing about drift is that it rarely feels dramatic. It shows up quietly. I'll think about it later. Now is not the right time. I should be grateful. I'm too old to start that. I do not need to prove anything anymore. What would people think? I'll wait until things settle down. And then years pass. Not because you chose the wrong thing, but because you never really chose. That is why retirement is not the enemy. Drift is. Retirement can be chosen. Rest can be chosen. A slower life can be chosen. But drift is different. Drift is what happens when you stop choosing. Fourth, you do not need to become someone else. You need to stop abandoning who you already are. This is where I think a lot of personal development language gets it wrong. It tells people to transform, reinvent, start over, become a new person. And sometimes that language helps. But after 50, it can also feel exhausting. Because you're not starting from zero. You're not a raw beginner trying to find yourself. You have lived, you have built, you have paid prices. You have learned things the hard way. So maybe the next chapter is not about becoming someone else. Maybe it is about becoming more honest, more focused, more selective, more intentional. Maybe it is about recovering the parts of you that got buried under responsibility, under performance, under success, under the identity that worked for a long time but no longer fits. Maybe you do not need a new identity. Maybe you need a better use for the identity you already earned. That is what the Rewire is about. Not escape, not reinvention, not nostalgia, not retirement as a disappearance. A deliberate next chapter, built from who you already are. So if the old retirement script is too small and the old work identity is too heavy, what do you actually need? I think you need four things: a mission, something to unlearn, a system, and a table. That is the M.U.S.T framework: mission, unlearn, system, table. A few years ago, I started asking myself these questions. I was not trying to build a framework, I was trying to get out of my own drift. I am 60. I have spent decades building businesses, leading teams, working in strategy and marketing, making decisions, starting things, fixing things, and learning from mistakes. And I can tell you something very honestly. Knowing how to build does not automatically mean you know what you build next. That is a very different question. And these four areas kept coming back: mission, unlearn, system, and table. So let me give you the short version, not the full teaching. We will go deeper into each one in future videos. But for now, just listen for the one that makes you uncomfortable, because that is usually where the work begins. The first pillar is mission. And the question is, what do you still want to build? Not what should you build, not what would impress people, not what keeps you busy, not what looks appropriate, not what your whole identity expects from you. What do you actually still want to build? And I know that question can be uncomfortable, because after decades of responsibility, many people stop asking what they want. They know what is expected. They know what needs to be maintained. They know what other people need from them. They know the role they play. But they have not asked themselves honestly what is still mine to build. And maybe also, what could I build that creates both meaning and income? Because for many people, the next chapter cannot only be emotionally fulfilling, it also has to be financially sustainable. That does not mean you need to build an empire. It does not mean you need to create another exhausting career. But maybe it does need to produce income. Maybe it needs to reduce pressure. Maybe it needs to create options. It needs to help you stay free. So, mission is not just about purpose, it is about direction. It asks, where is your energy supposed to go now? And what is worth building at this stage of your life? The second pillar is Unlearn. And this one is also uncomfortable. Because the problem is not always what you do not know. Sometimes the bigger problem is what you learn to all. Maybe you learn to always be useful. Maybe you learn to always be available. Maybe you learn to measure your worth by productivity. Maybe you learn to carry everything yourself. Maybe you learn that asking for help means weakness. Maybe you learn that your value comes from your title, or your company, or your income, or your ability to solve everyone else's problems. And maybe those beliefs worked. Maybe they worked very well. Maybe they help you build the life you have. But the question now is, do they still fit? That is Unlearn. Not rejecting your past, not disrespecting what worked, but having the courage to say, this helped me then, but it may be limiting me now. And this includes financial beliefs too. Maybe you believe income can only come from a job. Maybe you believe your expertise is not something people would pay for outside your old role. Maybe you believe starting something now is irresponsible. Maybe you believe it is too late to build a new income stream. Maybe you believe you have to choose between freedom and earning money. But what if that is not true? What if the next chapter is not about choosing between retirement and work? What if it is about designing a better kind of work? Smaller, sharper, more intentional, more flexible, more yours. That is a very different conversation, and it starts with unlearning the rules that no longer fit. The third pillar is system, and this is where I get very practical, because motivation is not a strategy. Motivation comes and goes. Inspiration comes and goes. Energy comes and goes. But systems hold. And if you want a deliberate next chapter, you need structure. Not a prison, not a rigid plan, but enough structure to protect what matters. Because without structure, life fills the space. Other people's needs fill the space. Old obligations fill the space. Errands fill the space. Email, news, distraction fills the space. And suddenly, the thing you said mattered most has no place to live. That is why system matters. A system asks, what rhythm supports this next chapter? What do your mornings protect? What do your weeks prioritize? What do you say no to automatically? What do you measure? What do you repeat? What do you simplify? What do you stop carrying? And if income matters, the system has to include that too. How will income be generated? Through what offer? For whom? With what rhythm? At what level of effort? In a way that supports your life instead of taking it over again. Because that is the key. The goal is not to leave one cage and build another one. The goal is to create a structure that gives you freedom, meaning, and oxygen. Intention without structure becomes wishful thinking. And at this stage of life, wishful thinking is too expensive. The fourth pillar is table. And this one may be the most underestimated. The question is, who sits at your table now? Not literally, although sometimes literally too, but emotionally, strategically, energetically. Who are the people close enough to influence your next chapter? Who makes your future feel normal? And who keeps pulling you back into an old version of yourself? This matters more than people think, because the wrong table can make a bold life feel irresponsible, and the right table can make a bold life feel obvious. Some people are loyal to who you used to be. They do not mean harm, but they know the old you. They understand the old role. They are comfortable with the old pattern. So when you start changing, even in a healthy way, they may resist. They may ask, why would you do that now? Isn't it a little late? Shouldn't you just enjoy life? Do you really need another project? Or maybe the opposite. Why would you leave that job if it still pays well? And look, sometimes there are good questions. You should listen. You should think carefully. You should not make reckless moves just because you are restless. But you also need people at your table who can hold a bigger conversation. Not just, is this safe, but is this true? Is this sustainable? Is this financially intelligent? Is this aligned with who you are now? Does this give you more life? That is the kind of table you need. People who tell the truth. People who do not flatter you. People who do not drain you. People who help you stay courageous and practical. Because a good table does not just encourage your dreams, it helps you build them responsibly. So those are the four pillars: mission, unlearn, system, and table. What do you still want to build? What has to go? What structure will make it real? And who belongs close to you now? That is the rewire. Not a dramatic reinvention. Not a motivational speech. Not a fantasy. A practical way to look at the next chapter. Because when people feel stuck after 50, I do not think it is always because they lack options. Often, they have too many options. They could consult, invest, teach, travel, volunteer. They could start something, or slow down, or they could keep working. The problem is not always lack of possibility. The problem is lack of clarity, and in many cases, lack of structure. Because a vague dream is not enough, a retirement fantasy is not enough, and a financial spreadsheet by itself is not enough either. You need a next chapter that makes sense as a life, not just as an idea, not just as a bank account, not just as a calendar, as a life. That means meaning, rhythm, people, health, contribution, and yes, for many people, income. The question is whether you can build a better way to do it. A way that fits who you are now. A way that uses your experience. A way that gives you more freedom, not less. A way that does not ask you to disappear and does not force you to keep playing the old game forever. That is the third path. That is the rewire. So if something in this video landed, if you found yourself nodding, if you felt that quiet discomfort of recognition, if you thought, yes, that's me, I'm not done, but I do not want the old life either, then the next step is not to blow anything up. You do not need to announce a reinvention. You do not need to make a dramatic life decision today. The next step is much simpler. You need to see where you actually are. That is why I created the Rewired Life Assessment. It is free. It takes about 10 minutes. And it shows you where you stand across the four M.U.S.T pillars. You may discover what your mission is unclear, or that an old version of success is still running your life, or that you have energy but no structure, or that the wrong people are too close to your table, or that you need to build a more practical income generating path for your next chapter. Whatever it shows you, that is useful, because honest information is the only real starting point. The link is in the description. Take the assessment, look at the results, and start there, because you may not be done. You may just be ready to rewire.